Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second session of the lecture series, Organization and Management in Higher Education, organized by Peking University and Tampere University. So now I just want to give you an explanation. So actually, Professor Yang Po from Peking University should be the moderator or the chair of the session, but she has some problem with the throat, so I think it's better to let her be more relaxed. So she asked me to temporarily, replace her role. So I just have a note here. So now I will first announce some housekeeping rule for this online lecture, and then I will start introducing our speaker today, Jussi Kivistö. Very briefly, so please remember the lecture is being recorded, and the parts of the lecture that were allowed to be on the website of the Sino-Finnish Education Research Center located at Tampere University. The presentation slides will also be available there. During the online lecture, please keep yourself muted unless you are asked to speak or ask a question at the Q&A part. So you can keep your video on if you wish. We recommend to use the speaker view that can be selected in the top right corner of your Zoom screen so that you could clearly see who is speaking. To ask a question, please use the chat function to indicate your question or comment, and then the facilitator will invite you to raise the question in the Q&A part, or he can read it to the speaker. When you are invited to ask a question, please unmute yourself, turn on your camera, state your name, and which institution you are from. Okay, now I introduce today's lecturer, Professor Jussi Kivistö from Tampere University. He is really the leading scholar, or at least one of the leading scholars globally on the topic today. So I have the honor to introduce my dear colleague, Jussi Kivistö. So he is a professor and head of higher education group in Faculty of Management and Business, Tampere University, Finland. Dr. Kivistö has over 15 years of experience in teaching and coordinating in higher education management program in non-degree, master degree, and doctor degree level. Dr. Kivistö has authored around 130 academic publications, research reports, or other professional publications. He collaborates actively with national and supranational agencies and organizations working in the field of higher education. His research interests include higher education management, policy, governance, and financing of higher education institutions. So today, his lecture is about financing in higher education and agency theory. So you see, floor is yours, please. So you have around 45 minutes for your lecture, and then the rest of the time will be reserved for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind words and invitation, and good evening to most of you, I think, are from China, and it's evening there. Here in Finland, it's 2 o'clock afternoon, but I put the evening picture there to be more in line with your time zone. I also see here some of our own students and people probably around the world, so this is a global session, but most of you are from China. It's happy to be here. So I'm putting my slides on just a moment. Here. And then I will share my screen. You see my...
It's already shared.
Okay, it's already shared. Good. So the topic is one of my favorites for many reasons. First of all, the financing higher education is something I really like studying about and reading about and teaching about. And the other part of it, which would be the focus of today and how we look at the financing of higher education, is through the lens of agency theory. And this is the theory which I did my PhD in 2007. And since then I published, I don't know, maybe 10 publications altogether about using the agency theory in various contexts. Now it's been a little bit slower in that sense that I haven't been that active using the theory. But just before this lecture today, I checked and happy to see many of the other scholars taking the theory, using in the field of higher education in different kind of settings. And this 45 minutes is more or less to discuss about the theory and its implications to the financing of higher education systems, mainly from the perspective of public authorities and higher education institutions, which are, I mean, public authorities, I mean ministries, funding agencies, governments, and the like, local governments, and so on. So these big branches of public sector which are responsible for financing higher education. So the setting is primarily used in this context. In the readings, I also shared you one of my co-authored articles which used the theory to the higher education institution and education agent relationship. So, and that's a different kind of setting. And I leave it there, so I don't discuss much about it because I need to focus on something. It's only 45 minutes. But there you can see the other kind of application of the theory, which is not exactly what we are going to talk about today. And I'm really happy to say also that my dissertation was kindly translated to Chinese. So Beijing Beijing University of Technology. Tsai, please correct me if this is not correct English name. But anyway, they did the translation. So the book is somewhere available in China. I don't know if it's online, but at least it was printed in 2010. So if you would like to, those who are Chinese participants, so if you like to read this in your own language, so it's possible, thanks to the Beijing Tech who did the translation. But yes, I think I set my objectives here. One thing I missed is to a bit talk about also the strengths and weaknesses of the theory, because whatever theory you use, you have all sorts of strengths and weaknesses included. Agency theory is not an exception here, but it's good to know what these are. If you're using the theory to model the empirical reality, so you should know what are the strengths and weaknesses, where you can go right and wrong. And for this reason, I also included this evaluation of the theory, which is actually also the part of my own PhD thesis. So, 2 questions, 1 answer. From the agency theory perspective, pretty much what the theory is about can be described in these 2 questions and 1 answer. So the first question is why public authorities need to hold higher education institutions accountable in terms of monitoring behavior and measuring performance. So why public authorities just cannot trust higher education institutions without monitoring and measurement? So why public authorities, governments, ministries, and so on just don't give the money to higher education institutions and then leave it there? And this is the question which is very relevant from the perspective of agency theory. And agency theory's response to this is that the reason why the money is not just given and left there is because higher education institutions can misuse the money, so that they are not producing what they are expected to produce with that money. So they waste it in one way or another, pursue other less meaningful goals with the money, and not the things which are expected by the party or the organization which is offering the money to the higher education institutions. And this leads to suboptimal outcomes. So the money which will be invested to higher education institutions from the public purse is not producing optimal results, or that's they're afraid of that. And so the basic idea why this happens is really that people tend to behave sometimes opportunistically, meaning that they do their own stuff. They are shirking, which means that they are not doing the work, but doing some leisure work, or they do things which are part of their work, but with different kinds of priorities. And it's a self-serving behavior, which is totally normal and one part of the human nature. But the agency theory takes this into the frame and tries to mitigate the problem, what arises from this. So agency theory has two parts always, and it doesn't matter whether we talk about individual level or if we talk about organizational level, whatever. So there are two parties. The one is the principal, which has the money and which needs to some task to be accomplished. The other one is the agent, who the principal recruits to perform the task and then gives money to performing the task. So everyday life, we are surrounded by examples of principal-agent relationships. So you go to car repair shop, you need to get your car fixed. So you make a deal with them that they fix the car or do the maintenance and you pay for that. And for this, it is actually then a principal-agent relationship in a way that I, as a car owner, order a service from the car repair shop to fix my car and expect that to happen because I pay for that. Or it goes also in family relationships. Sometimes you pay money to your kids to take the trash outside because then they are incentivized to do this. Otherwise, you would be nagging for them or trying to persuade them. But if you offer them money, they will do it. And you can then observe whether the task was accomplished or not, based on what's the outcome, and so on. So they are everywhere. Everywhere where you have two parties or two or more parties, and the one party is the principal, the other party or parties are the agents. There's a task which needs to be accomplished, and then the party which called principal gives money to the other party called agent to perform the task. This is simple. So the background of the theory is pretty much in economics. So it was evolved in many ways. So there are different versions of agency theory, which is, by the way, known also as a principal agent theory. So these both titles are used in parallel, so they mean basically the same thing. But nevertheless, so there are different versions of principal agent theory or agency theory within the economics and also within the political science. They have a little bit different kinds of emphasis. Political science perspective looks a little bit more into the political processes, selection of boards of trustees, or to what extent the selected government is pursuing the needs of the and will of the parliament and so on. But the same thing is there. So there are two parties, other needs to do something, and the other one is the one who holds this other party accountable for one way or another. The thing what I will present today leans more to the economics branch. So I wrote together with an American political scientist a book chapter about the differences between the economic model and then the political science model in the context of higher education governance. And I don't think this is available openly, but if you send me a request through ResearchGate or directly, I can happily submit the preprint proof for you. But it's not, I don't think it's available publicly at the moment. But anyway, that's one of the things I try to contribute in a way to bring together these two disciplines. I'm not economist from my own background, so I'm from administrative studies or administrative science. My interest is lying on the public policy. I'm happy to see that many scholars from different fields are using the agency theory, either the more economic oriented or then the political science oriented way, without having a background in the studies. And one of the articles I gave to you in advance, the readings here, so I submitted 3 readings, 2 of my own and one from Kathleen Eisenhardt. the Eisenhardt piece was really important for me to understand the agency theory as I understand it now. So when I was writing my PhD, there was different kinds of descriptions of the principal agent theory, and they, in a way, were a little bit like conflicting with each other. But I think this Kathleen Eisenhardt's article made a breakthrough in my own thinking in a way that I then completely understood what the theory is about and how it can be used. So I highly recommend that. It has nothing to do with the higher education governance or financing of higher education, but it really gives you the background of the theory in economics and then takes it to the business field in the relationship between the boards, company boards and management, where the agency theory was first place used in the field of economics or organizational economics. And highly recommend that article if you're interested about the theory to read. And you might even want to start with that article because it's so good. But yes, it's more and more frequently applied in the field of education studies. So as I mentioned, so I just checked before this talk that we really have increasing number of articles and book chapters citing the agency theory or using the agency theory from various perspectives. So there has to be something in the theory which makes it useful. Of course, as I mentioned, there are lots of weaknesses, and I will discuss them a little bit later in this session. But nevertheless, it seems that it's a very well-living theory at the moment, also in the field of higher education research, and I'm happy to see that. Okay. Agency theory is relevant in all hierarchical or contractual relationships where two of the following conditions surrounding the relationship exists. So there needs to be goal conflicts, and there needs to be informational asymmetries between the principal and the agent. And what this means is that there needs to be different interests, different motivations on the part of agent compared to the one of principal. So agent needs to want a little bit different things, not every time, not always, but sometimes, than the principal. So there's a self-interest which is different than what is the principal. Because if there is no such thing, then the theory is meaningless, because then automatically the agent will do always the same things what the principal wants without exception. And then there's no need to design what is the most effective controlling and financing method for certain types of relationships, because automatically agents want the same thing and are accomplishing the same things as wanted by the principal. So this is one of the key conditions which needs to be there. And the second one is informational asymmetries, which means that agent knows more about his or her own activities and the task accomplishment than the principal does. So the principal cannot observe all the time what the agent is doing and what he or she is producing. And I give you an example here, the car repair shop. So if I take my car there, there's a problem, or it just goes to the maintenance, and I give them the task, please maintain my car, oil needs to be changed, you need to change the filters or whatever. And then I leave the car there, go to work, come back to pick up the car, and they say that it's now maintained. How do I know that? Because I don't open the hood and check the engine. I can't do that because I don't have the capability of being a technician. So I just have to trust them that they actually did what they promised to do. But I don't have no verification for that. And that means there's an informational asymmetry. So I cannot see whether they actually did the work or not. I can see the outcome, which is the bill and my car standing in the parking lot, but I cannot see what was done to that. So, I mean, just to illustrate what I mean by informational asymmetries. And it's the same thing in government higher education institution relationships, where government or public authorities give money to higher education institutions. They set some kind of goals, wishes, standards, measurements, reporting responsibilities, evaluations, which in a way try to verify that the thing they want to happen when they give the money to the higher education institution actually happens. But there always there's a great room for informational asymmetry. So there is no way public authorities could look into higher education institutions and see all the processes related to teaching, research, and service what are happening there. So they have to rely on reports, they have to rely on reviews or something like that, but they are not there to see everything what happens. And this is informational asymmetry. There's always this, no matter what you do. By the way, in my screen, I can see two red slashes right here. I don't know if you see, I don't know where they came from. But anyway, we can move on.
Yeah, you can go on. I have no idea about it.
Let's see, just check if I can. No. Yeah, they are. Don't worry. They are there. So okay, let's see if there's something more. No, not cat picture yet. So why information asymmetries and goal conflicts are essential. So this is the thing what I just said. So if there is no these two conditions, so the agency theory is worthless, useless. You don't know you don't need it. Because if you want the same thing together, I mean, if agent and principal wants the same thing, then there is no divergent interest and no reason to believe that the goals wouldn't be accomplished. Or if there's no informational asymmetries, so the principal always can see what happens. So the agent cannot, in a way, to pursue his or her own interest because the principal can directly observe what's happening and he knows or she knows what's happening there. So there's no way to go around it either. The agent is successful or not successful, and that's visible. But agency theory calls this opportunism, what I mentioned here already, as a shirking, meaning that you take your own time. I mean, shirking means that you are not doing your responsibilities. You are relaxing on the working time. You're sleeping a nap, even if you need to do some work. By the way, sometimes napping during the working day is actually good for your productivity, but that doesn't mean that. So in this context, it means that you're not doing your responsibilities on a continuous basis, but you're receiving your salary. So that's shirking. But agency theory calls it a moral hazard problem. And there's also a branch of literature which discusses about the moral hazard problem from another perspective. And it's in a way defined a little bit different way there. But in the agency theory context, moral hazard problem means all forms of behavior which are not in the best interest of the principal when completing a given task. And I can give you examples what they are in the coming slides. There's also another agency problem called adverse selection problem, which means that in situations where principals are selecting agents to complete the task, they need to make some kind of conclusion which of the agents are likely to be the most productive one. So it's the same thing when the research financier receives tons of applications and then selects those which it decides to finance. But I don't discuss this problem here because I need to focus on something and there is a limited time, so I will skip that one. But what I wrote about agency theory in many of these articles or book chapters, also the problem of adverse selection and the dynamics related to that are explained, but not here, not today. So moral hazard problem means that agent is doing something on purpose. So the agent didn't do something like a mistake, or it was a misfortune, or incompetence, which is not intended incompetence, but it's something that the agent really wants to pursue something else what the principal wants. Now this is my cat, and this is the meme I tried to create of it because that's how he looks when he does something which he clearly knows that is not allowed, and he doesn't care about it. So it's exactly this looks, and that's like the moral hazard look of a cat. So I took it here to make it a little bit more concrete. Anyway, I mean, whatever forms are, they usually are related or resulting to overspending or underachieving. So the car repair example is that it's underachievement if they don't do what I expect them to do and what we agreed on. Or then it's overspending that, yes, they do what they promised to do, but they actually then increased the cost because this and that, they couldn't estimate that there's this and that needs to be changed. And then they did it a little bit slower in a way that they can bill more hours or half an hour. So then it's overspending to the car repair, which is then not optimal result. And this is basically the two ways. So the moral hazard opportunism decreases the efficiency, effectiveness, and economy, which would be optimal. So, and the losses are always borne, or most cases, borne by the principal, which means me, the car owner. So they get more money they were supposed to have. I get the service I was expecting, but I pay more. And you can take the same dynamics to every individual or institutional level relationship, including higher education. So concrete examples will follow. There are two ways how to control this agent opportunism. And these are the two ways of the basic assumptions. The two ways are related to the basic assumptions of the agency theory, what I just mentioned: information asymmetries and goal conflicts. So if you are able to reduce informational asymmetries and you're able to see what's happening, then you should make a deal where you pay something based on what you observe. Meaning that the good example would be that you have an employee who is doing a telemarketing, and you can observe how well he or she is doing a job. So how many orders this telemarketing person is getting when he or she is doing the job, and you observe that. So you just watch how he does that, and how or she does that, and what kind of methods he or she uses, how frequently he or she calls, and you pay a monthly salary, regardless of the number of new deals. So that's a behavior-based contract. The other option is, which is more used, is that you tie the salary to the number of deals this telemarketing person is able to achieve. And this is then taking out the co-conflicts, or most of them, or so we believe at least, so that they are selling more and getting more deals, company gets more money, and then you pay part of the profit to these persons who are the most productive ones, those who sell more. So you have these two options, or you have a combination of these two. So you can pay partly a monthly salary, which is like a fixed rate for every month, regardless of the performance. And on the top of that, you get bonuses based on what you sell. But these two elements are tackling the two problems, which are information asymmetries and goal conflicts. And when you take it to the public, to the relationship between public authorities and then higher education institutions, you have two options when we discuss about the funding. The first one, which is the older one and which is the most traditional one, is that the public authority gives a bag of money to higher education institutions for doing educational, research-related or service-related tasks. And then they somehow control the use of the money, regardless of what is produced. There's a so-called line item budgeting method, which is still used in many countries, where you allocate the money to certain expenditure items, like facilities, like salaries, like equipment. like buildings and so on. And you cannot spend the money which you use for buildings to pay salaries unless it's agreed with the party who is providing the funds, which means in this case, the principal, the private authority. And in this way, the principal tries to observe how the money is spent and then believes that observing how the money is spent is actually the same thing that the higher education institution is doing what they are supposed to do. But the more modern, and I think this has been already around since 1990s in Western countries, and then since later other parts of the world as well, this so-called performance-based funding, which can be either the institutional level or coming also to the level of individuals, where the funds are tied with some of the outputs or outcomes, meaning performance, what higher education institutions or individuals are producing. And this requires performance measurement. So how many degrees are awarded, how many study credits are awarded per year, how fast students are graduating, how are they employed after graduating, so what's the employability or employment rate. In terms of research, how many publications in which outlets, which highly ranked, low ranked, they are published, how much external funding from other financiers than the public authority was generated. This can be rewarded. So these are like the outputs which can be expected higher education institutions to produce. And then the performance is then rewarded by allocating the money. In most countries all over the world, I mean, both options are used simultaneously. That means that part of the money is given based on either what they received last year, either what institutions are, how many students are there. I mean, it's tied on student number or then staff number or something else than what they produce. And this is then accompanied with a performance-based funding, which comes on the top of that. And in some countries, like in my own country, in Finland, we have taken the other extreme. The most part of the funding for higher education institutions, and this is for the universities, University of Applied Sciences are even more performance-driven than universities. So most part of the funds which are allocated as a core funding are allocated based on performance. And as you can see, I mean, these are the funds. This is the funding formula from the National Ministry to all public universities and two privates, which are basically public, but the legal perspective is private. It's 76% of the funds are performance-based. So you could say that Finnish universities operate more or less with the same principles as telemarketing individuals. So the universities get money mostly based on what they are producing and what they are here expected to produce. First of all, the degrees, and there's a multiplier. So the faster they are able to produce the degrees, the more money they will get. What could go wrong with this? This will be discussed a little bit later. Then there's continuous learning, which is basically lifelong learning. So there's something related to that performance, how the universities are performing that. So that's equals 5% of the fund. Number of employed graduates, and then graduate tracking. So basically what happens to graduate after they complete their studies? Graduates are of course always complete their studies. What happens to students after they complete their studies or graduates? So do they get a job? Do they get a job that is matching their skills, which were acquired when they were studying in universities? So this is one of the funding criteria. And then student feedback. In bachelor's level, because in Finland, students take first bachelor studies and then master studies, most often in the same university. So after the bachelor studies, universities are required to collect a feedback from students, and then government uses this feedback as one of the funding criteria. The better, more funding, worse, lower funding. Then we go to the research side. So PhDs are calculated here. So PhD degrees, number of PhD degrees equals 8%. And then you have this in publications, scientific publications. So we have a national ranking system which categorizes the publications into 4 levels, 3 being the highest. And it clearly incentivizes the higher education institutions, universities, to produce those publications which are at the highest level. And of course, individuals, because universities don't produce anything, individuals do. And in a way, this is part of the salary performance measurement. It's not that tight in a way that it's not that if you produce one U43 level, the highest level publication, you get more salary. Most of the universities, but some universities have even taken the bonus system. So if you publish a highest ranking journal publication, you get 3,000 euros from the university, because they calculate they get more money from the government. So there is in a way a profit, and then they just pass it on to the individuals who produce it. There's a lots of problems related to this idea, but nevertheless, some of the universities do that, and that would be an interesting research to see to what extent in these universities who are using these metrics are more productive than the other ones, or are they not, when you compare the size and then the situation before this funding model was taken into use. Then competitive research funding. So universities, more they are able to accumulate funding from the either international research financiers, in most cases European Union, or then national research financiers, in most cases Academy of Finland. They get on the top of that money from the ministry. So ministry is incentivizing universities to accumulate external research funding, and then rewards this by giving them more money. So it's like Matthew effect. Those who have more shall be given more, and those who have less shall be given less. So there's a very powerful incentive here, if you look at these two. And there's an interesting dynamics, by the way, involving this. So as you can see, there are PhD degrees, scientific publications, and then you have competitive research funding. They are correlating with each other. You are successful in one, you're likely to be successful in other two. If you get a PhD student, he or she produces scientific publications. Sometimes you get the PhD student by having a competitive research grant, and then the PhD student produces publications. So this pushes universities to be more research oriented automatically, actually, this model, because the same kind of scale efficiency effects or scale productivity effects are not present in the side of education, but in the research it does. But just to show what it means, what performance-based funding means, and what are the goals. So you can see from our government goals here, our government wants more degrees, faster degrees, more continuous learning, that all the graduates, or most of them, are employed, and particularly those jobs which they are trained for. They want that the students are happy, so they collect the feedback and finance that. They want PhD degrees, they want good quality publications, and they want competitive research funding. And then this is the goals. And you can say, what else universities would like to do in this? Are there something wrong? And if you take this to the dynamics, the principal agent setting is that not necessarily anything is wrong here, but maybe the priorities, how they are put in here, are not the way we would like to run our own university. So we are more or less tied to the funding scheme, what comes from the national level. Because in Finland, universities are highly dependent on the government funding. So the money is something between 60 or 50 and 70% of the university funds. That makes a major part of their funding. And this is now that they would like to do maybe something else, like social interaction or something which is good and which is productive, but not rewarded by the model. And now many things can be left undone because these incentives are so powerful. And then that's, if you do actually good things, but which are not measured, that can be considered as an opportunistic behavior. Of course, universities can spend the money to stupid things, and then but they are facing the consequences then because they need to finance these things. So the idea of producing these things is that there should be something which is more or less in line with both parties. But that's not always the case. And in these cases, the opportunism is not really shirking, but it's basically something which might have a different priorities. There are lots of problems related to these publication models. It's not something that we shouldn't use here. We did together with two of the colleagues an empirical study how the incentives related to the publication publication ranking model, this UFO model, has impacted publication behavior in two fields, social sciences and humanities. And they are clearly directed towards international publishing and sometimes even in journals which are not so good compared to the Finnish ones. And then there's always the domestic view. So we're a very small country, 5.5 million people. That's one block in Beijing, more or less. So we try to keep our national language alive. And for this, we also need the language of science. And if you look at the social sciences and humanities, it's pretty important that they will also publish and continue to publish publications in our domestic language. But this creates the system where you have more prestigious, this is a simplification, but anyway, where you have more prestigious and more well awarded journals only in English, then people are changing into English. That's, of course, a good thing in terms that you can spread your research results more widely, but then it discourages many of the things which would be important also from the domestic perspective. And then it deals with different fields a little bit differently, because in some fields, in sciences, in technology, the publishing language being English is more like a natural, but when it comes to social sciences and humanities, it is not necessarily not. So how to then to decide what's optimal? Agency theory presents so-called agency variables for this. So you can think when you look at the variables, which of the controlling options would be the more optimal than others. And I have taken here, there's some categorizations where you have 5 or 6 these variables, but I have taken the 4, the most crucial ones, and I walk you through what I mean by them. So first of all is that you have to think about the outcome measurability. Is there something in the task you can actually then measure if it's accomplished or not? And if it's low, meaning that, okay, there are very unclear outcomes, what I expect is not some detailed product or detailed service or detailed outcome, but something like more vague or more broad, then it's more difficult to measure it. And higher education is actually one of these things. So you can put things which are measurable in terms of outputs, but then the real impact of these outputs is very difficult to measure. And I would say that if we look at the measurability as a whole, it's really, if you look at the end product, which is more information, more, economic benefits for the nation, more civilized society, and so on. So they are things which you cannot measure, but instead of that, you are breaking it down to something you can measure. And there's a great risk what can happen. And again, I don't say that performance-based funding is wrong, but I would say that allocating 76% of the funding using performance indicators not necessarily the most smartest things to do. Our government is currently evaluating the model. We're happy to see the outcomes next spring, so what are their conclusions, but there's a great risks of unethical behavior. And this comes then as a form of opportunism. I give you an example from the publications. So, okay, publications are measured. How about slicing the topic exactly as I have done in terms of agency theory to more publications than one? I will add information, but only to a limited extent by publishing a new one. Of course, it's a journal decision or book decision whether they want to have another chapter or article about agency theory. But I do this or I might do this because it's rewarded by our university, which is then again rewarded by our government. Instead of that, I could write a textbook in Finnish, which would be actually more in line with the national policy goals of our higher education policy. But because of the funding and because of the measurement, I select to produce less meaningful publications in English. So this is in a way a goal displacement. So intrinsic, something which is less measurable but important is overcome by something which is measurable but lesser important. Or then in study competition, as you mentioned, as you saw there, so universities get more money based on how fast they are able to graduate students. I understand it from the perspective, from the government's point of view, you should not spend too much time studying. Once you're finished, you should go and start working, because education here is free of charge and it's publicly funded. So it's from the taxpayers' interest that basically students start to pay taxes and then in this way paying back their own education. But the expectation is that this happens by offering better quality education and by offering flexible study paths in a way that the course competitions are not problems, or courses are not overlapping and so on. But what also can happen is that universities downgrade the requirement level in order to pass more students. And that's not good for the quality, isn't it? But it gives you more graduates, which graduate faster. Again, there's limited empirical evidence that this happens, because it's quite difficult to investigate to what extent and how much it happens. But there is anecdotal information. All of us who work in the Finnish universities know that in some cases this might be this might happen. And then it comes to the quality assurance system, and I don't go into that because that comes too complex, but just giving insight what is output measurability. Then output uncertainty, which means that if you are paying agent based on what they produce, they should have full control then in the production process, isn't that? Because otherwise it's not fair. And I take one example is the employment criteria. So to what extent universities can actually influence that students who are graduating find a job which is according to their skills which they were trained to. So there's a match. To some extent by designing good curriculums, having close interaction with the working life and so on. But that actual happening that the students or graduates are getting the job, they cannot do after they graduate anything for that. And yet the measurement is something which happens after their possibilities to influence it is over. There can be differences in fields. In some fields, students are finding jobs more easily than others. There are geographical differences in country where you can get employed easily in the location where you are living and so on. So this is kind of a halfway through indicator in the sense that yes, institutions can have an impact, but there's a certain level of uncertainty involved which they don't have a control. And then there's a question, is this a good indicator then to measure? Or does this give unfair distribution of the funding and give wrong types of signals? Of course, you can take the research processes and look at the unpredictability and there and say that it's uncertain as well. But then again, that's the same for all of the institutions, regardless where they live. The only difference might be then the fields. I mean, in some fields, it's easy to get through with a project and then publish the outcomes and others, and that's then different. Task programmability means that how easily you can standardize the work. I mean, if you're working in a hamburger restaurant, you can pretty easily see what the employee is doing. There's a certain standardized procedures he or she follows when he takes the hamburgers and sells it. And for this reason, they are not paid by according to the level or number of hamburgers they are able to sell. but they're paid usually monthly salaries, which are based on how well they do their work and do they follow the procedures and so on. So if it's low, then you can do the performance-based, the behavior-based monitoring approach much more easily. In higher education, the work is so complex, processes are so complex that this is not possible. And then the conflict, the higher it is, the more likelihood there is then the opportunistic behavior to happen, and then that would push you to use more of these performance-based / output-based contracts. But then, as I mentioned, this needs to be balanced. So there's a good and bad sides in each of these variables. I need to a little bit hurry up because I can see that I'm lagging a little bit behind. So I will wrap this up more or less in 5 minutes. Agency costs are then a very important dimension when you look at the agency theory, because these are the costs which are caused by the opportunistic action of the agent, plus then the costs which are resulting from the governance work and governance tasks done by the principal. So taking these together, then you have an agency costs. And to determine which one is higher, so does it, I mean, there can be a trade-off. So if I leave universities uncontrolled, I don't have any costs related to controlling because I don't try to control them. But do the opportunism then emerge? And the cost related to that, is it the suboptimal outcomes which are actually then costing me more than trying to governance at universities? Now this is the trade-off where you try to understand, I mean, what the principal should do or shouldn't do. And both of these are really difficult to estimate without saying that you actually are calculating them in monetary terms. But they give you some picture about when's is it really meaningful or not start to controlling something. If the money, let's say a project funding which is given ad hoc to some of the institutions to do something, and it's really insignificant from the total budget, it goes without saying that it's very unwise to tie their heavy governance and reporting measures, because that's costing you or can cost you as much as you give money out. And there's no point of doing that. You just need to trust in that to universities. On the other hand, if you give a big bag of money, then there is, of course, the responsibility. You should look after that. But how and to what extent and different methods you use, then the agency theory can give you perspectives, which are the good sides and bad sides using these options. And maybe if you are smart enough, you can calculate some estimates of the costs which are related to opportunism or governance. I would say from this that in many ways, agency theory can point you that you have a lose-lose relationship between the public authorities and universities in a situation where you use lots of money to controlling higher education institutions, and they are opportunistic anyway because their opportunism is escaping the monitoring and governance. So in this way, it can be a lose-lose situation. Main weaknesses, so something about strengths and weaknesses of the theory. Where's my strength? Goal conflicts, information asymmetries, and then of course there needs to be tasks given to the agent from the principal. And agency theory is able to explain, I mean, theories have three important purposes. They are for describing, they are for explaining, and they are for predicting. And agency theory is able to do all these three. So first of all, the describing is that you can put these rather complex settings of financial responsibility and tasks to a very simple framework called agency theory, and you can generate, I think, very good insights. What are the challenges here and how they could be tackled? And the explanation is that agency theory is able to produce just a very good explanation for that, why performance-based salary is used, why opportunism exists, or why sometimes it's smart to offer monthly salaries or just give the budget to institutions minimum control or governance measures. And third thing is that the agency theory is bold enough to take on the table one part of human nature which is less discussed, and that's self-interest. So the assumption is that you will try to pursue your own self-interest, whatever, either more or less, but you will do it anyway. And I think that's a justifiable assumption in most cases. But the problem here, when it comes to the weaknesses, is that people are not doing that on purpose every time, all the time. And that's like everything they want to do. They do it occasionally. They do it, well, you have pathological individuals who try to steal all the things all the time, but nonetheless, most of the people usually have good morals and they try to do their job as good as they can. And actually, this kind of monitoring and controlling can make people less productive, because you don't like that you're being controlled, monitored, and measured all the time, because that's a sign of mistrust. And then that's have a relation how you think about the university or whatever, I mean, where you're working with. So that's also a possibility that decreases the productivity. And agency theory doesn't care about that too much. So that's clearly a limitation. Economic aspects. So it fails to explain principles, utility losses, any other factor than agent opportunity. And that means that if there's a performance failure, agency theory's response is that that's because of the opportunism of the agent or poor governance from the side of the principal. But that can be like a mistake, which is unintentional, or something which has nothing to do with the opportunism. So you have to take into account that not all performance failures are because people are self-interested or self-serving. There are genuine interest and willingness to do things right, but always they are not going in the right direction. And agency theory doesn't contribute to this discussion at all. Then competing principles. I mean, we're living in a society where you have multiple principles. So in addition to this public authority, whether it's ministry, government, or whatever, you have research financiers, you have private donors, you have students who pay tuition fees, you have multinational or supra-governmental agencies who support funding. So you may end up in situations where, as an agent, you have multiple principles, and fulfilling one principle's wishes is going against other principles' wishes. And the agency theory cannot take this into account by offering a holistic picture how this should be solved. But the relationship needs to be investigated always one by one. And this is clearly a limitation. And then the principal goals are given. Some of the questions I received, we go through probably them here, is how about principles opportunism? That's a good question. So if principal is pushing too stupid goals or wrong goals or whatever, from the perspective of agent, what does the agency theory suggest in this situation? And that's nothing, because it gives as a given, it takes as a given that the goals of the principles need to be observed by the agent, and it's investigating this relationship. It doesn't take any moral or rational stance whether the goals are good, bad, or what they are. It just takes them. And one of the things, this is my almost last slide, is that there's actually less information in what happens inside the universities. I mean, even if we use the performance-based funding and we can see that, okay, results are increasing, performance is getting better, and therefore we can deduce that, okay, performance-based funding increases the productivity. And that's a right conclusion, but we don't know how and why that happens. To what extent the productivity is a game playing, to what extent it's a genuine improvement in certain processes. And agency theory cannot in a way open this black box. And that needs to be done in order to understand more how dynamics of the incentives work. And this is an empirical work which is still quite a lot undone. American scholars, which are more ahead of, I would say, studying the impact of the performance-based funding, have done something for that, but this is clearly a gap which still exists and needs to be fulfilled in the future. And my last slide is that agency theory is not perfect, but neither is any other theory. Just understand its limitations before using it and you will be fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jussi. It's a very clear presentation of the theory and its useness in higher education context, and also you clearly identified the strengths and the weaknesses. So of course, every theory has its boundaries. The important thing, as you already addressed, is to know what is the limitation so that we can use the theory for the right purpose. And also, in some cases, we know how we can complement each other by using different theoretical perspectives. I do not want to use more time. I think our audience might be very interested and have some issues to discuss with you. So I'm just, okay, so yeah, so Professor Yang Po, maybe you can directly, since you are on, you just turn on your microphone, you can ask your question.
Thank you, Jussi, for the wonderful presentation. It's very clear and articulated, especially giving your examples from the Finnish context. I think it's very informative. My question is really the one I think the quite interesting is, because you said the theory coming from the economic studies and also from political science. So I assume in the principal agent relationship is especially regarding, use the efficiency as a key principles, right? To choose the optimal contract. So I'm wondering, with the universities as a prestige maximizer, right, rather than a profit maximizer, how can we apply this kind of theory to institutions or organizations who are not pursuing profits, right? And also in terms of government, when they use accountability measures, they also, quite different as other kind of business organizations to, to push pressure on the agents to pursue economic outcomes. So when you use the principal agent theory in higher education studies, how do you kind of apply the theory? What the limitations are, or do you feel there's a tension there? Okay, yeah, thank you.
This is an excellent question, and I think this is a very good discussion topic because, as you mentioned, yes, when I have written about agency theory, this comes from the American literature. Nevertheless, so that universities, even private non-profits, should not make profit. And the only universities which are there for profit are private for-profits, and in this context, the agency theory is not often applied because they are not funded by the government. Or then the principal is the student who is paying the tuition fees, and then the agent is the institution. So instead of profit, higher education institutions are wanting other things as an institutions and organizations. They want to be ranked higher in the global rankings. They want to have more nice buildings. They want to show their size and might by building campuses which are maybe too expensive and these kind of things, and they need money for that. So you can say that every higher education institution may not be a profit maximizer, but they are revenue maximizers in the sense that they want to collect all the money they are able to raise. Hardly I have ever seen an individual working in the university, maybe I have, but not institution or department or college or faculty who has said, don't give us more money because we have plenty. So this is always the question. They want more money, and for what they want, not for profit, but they want to increase the prestige or the visibility or something which doesn't necessarily equate with quality or productivity. And from agency theory's perspective, the profit is, of course, when you go to the private sector and look at the market conditions, that's the main thing. But it's always possible to apply the setting to public sector, and in this context also to non-profit universities, by only looking at what are the possible utility losses of the principle, so that you are not getting, as a principle, the best possible outcome for the money invested. And that's not resulting from the profit of the universities, but how they use the money into the wrong purposes.
Yeah, thank you. I think you made the point clear. So the profits or benefits for universities are often intangible, so which is different to the profits, which are more tangible in the business sector. So before I invite more commentators or questions, I just want to show the book.
Yeah, there it is.
So there is a translation of Yussi's doctoral dissertation in Chinese. I think you can see the title. Probably you just search it. Hopefully, there's still some copies available after a long time in the market. So I just want to show you the book. But now I do my job, so I continue to watch the chat box. So Li Lan 老师, maybe you can ask your question by yourself. Just turn on your microphone.
Yeah, I mean, if you have only the possibility of putting the question in an oral way, that's always nicer. But if we don't have time to go through all the questions, then I can write the answers in the chat box after the session.
Yeah, I think since we do not have many, so only two
Okay, good.
coming.
Let's go.
So I think it's good that you just show your face and ask. Maybe you want to further elaborate on your question, make it clear to Jussi. Please, welcome. I cannot hear you. It seems your microphone is on. Probably there's some. Okay. I suppose there are some audio issues.
Yeah, but you can read it then, or I can read it if I.
Yeah. Maybe you can directly ask yourself. You can also read the same
All right.
text.
Okay, I go through in the order as they are presented here. Okay. The next one is, in Eisenhardt's article, she suggested to apply agency theory with other theories. How to apply agency theory with other theoretical perspective? Can you give an example? Yeah, I think this is a good point, and indeed it was raised by Eisenhardt. And the idea is that since agency theory is more or less incomplete or it offers incomplete picture, you should have other perspectives on agency theory, which are investigating the same topic, more or less, but from the different point of view, in order to get full picture, or at least more comprehensive picture. I must say that I read articles where you have a stakeholder theory, or then you have, what was the name of the, I can't remember, but these other alternative theories, I think the stakeholder theory is one of the most utilized theory to go with agency theory. But my own perspective was that when I'm doing research, I don't want to explain the whole phenomenon. I'm just looking at it from the perspective of agency theory. And by doing so, I admit the limitations of the study. But if you would like to see like a little bit with which food you want to go with this wine, so which theory you want to go with agency theory, the clearest way, I think, is to check the publications written from the perspective of agency theory, and then to see what other theories are used in different types of questions and different types of contexts. Because I think there's a quite then it might be that the field of the scholar comes into play if you are from the management side, or if you're from the public policy side, or if you're from the education, or you might then use additional theoretical viewpoints which are more or less tied to your basic scholarly or scientific background. So this is more like an answer from the politician, that I would recommend you to read what are the theories which are used in different kinds of settings and different kinds of research questions in certain types of situations where agency theory is applied. Hopefully that answered the question. And then there's a Chinese Chinese text which I don't understand, but possibly this is not for me.
That's the name of your book.
All right.
The title of your book in Chinese.
Okay, then I have Fernando is asking that with the case of Finland and from the sense of informational asymmetry, does quality assurance play a role in this process? And due to the weakness in regardless of the narrowness of scope, is it then not possible to relate actors such as the EU or European higher education area in cases such as this one? First of all, the quality assurance part, and this is a national discussion because if we look at Finland, we have a national quality assurance agency, which is mostly responsible for doing these institutional audits of higher education institutions, both the University of Applied Sciences and universities. And the method they use is more like quality enhancement rather than quality assurance, if I put it very simply. And they are mainly there to verify if higher education institutions have credible quality assurance system, which is then tied to their management system and so on, rather than inspecting the quality or assuring the quality from the outside. And this is a good point to ask, because if we have highly powered incentives which are dealing with quality in the national funding model, maybe we should have quality assurance models which actually looks a little bit closer different kinds of aspects of quality as they are manifested, especially in the teaching side or educational side. Research quality, it gets usually verified when it comes to peer review. You are peer reviewed whether before you publish, you're peer reviewed before you are getting external grants, but also in this case, what extent the barrier in a way is taken down internally in a way that you try to salami publish things, what I just mentioned. So you try to slice one topic of too many or unnecessary many sub publications in order to maximize your productivity. That's something which could be explored, but it's very hard to pinpoint that this actually happens, because it's from the outside and from the perspective of academic freedom, and you can always try to justify multiplying your publications for other reasons than opportunistic ones. So it would be very difficult. And when it comes to the narrowness of scope and the possible to relate actors of EU and European higher education area, that would be like competing principles from the perspective that the EU especially is a very strong research financier. And they have their own goals and they have their own reporting methods and their own preferences. And these are not always in line with our national policy goals, or to put it mildly, at least that something can be there which is pushing universities and individual researchers to a little bit different direction. And that would be a good thing to investigate, to what extent one principle's goals are pushing institutions to be opportunistic against other principles' goals. And I haven't seen much of research done empirically on this side, but quite likely it would be now a good time to study something about that, not only in Finland, but also in everywhere. Because then the dynamics, the real world where the universities and higher education institutions are living in is more accurate. So they have multiple constituencies they need to satisfy. And sometimes a lack of productivity in some subset of measures is not because they are evil, bad, or poorly behaving, but because they try to do the best job for another principle. Okay, that were the questions. Do we have?
Yeah, I think you have done a very good job, very efficiently. You have answered all the questions in the chat box. So where people can still keep asking questions, since there is a pause, maybe I can
Sure.
take an opportunity to ask you a question. I think the principal agency theory, you have explained it very well. I think agency theory does, applies to many aspects of the society, human behavior, because, being optimistic somehow is a part of the human nature. However, the country context may make things different. Maybe in some country, like in Finland, so there is a high trust. So maybe there's a less problem between the agency and the principal. For instance, to a large extent, if I drive my car to the car dealer, or repair place, I can to a large extent trust them. I think Finland is a very typical case of trust-based society. So I would like to hear your comments regarding the application of agency theory in higher education in different social contexts. For example, you may reflect, something you have observed, as a Finn in Finland.
I think you raised excellent points. So we are a highly trust-based society, and as you know, you can good old times leave a wallet on the street and it's taken to the police rather than people taking it and putting the money into your own pocket. I don't know to what extent this happens today, but nevertheless, so there's a high trust of public institutions, police, your fellow citizens, and what is said is actually then done. And then if we're living this kind of societies, for what we need the performance-based management and funding? And that's a good question. And then you need to seek reasons why this is taking place. One of the reasons is quite pragmatic. And that's something that the Ministry of Education can justify the really high budget of higher education institutions to the Ministry of Finance by offering them something which is tangible and measured. And this is actually a good reason. So Finland is one of the always among the top 3-4 most publicly funded higher education systems in the world. It's not the top funded because we lack the private investment, but it's from the public perspective, it's really good fund, really well funded. And for justification, the question is, would the budget be at the same level if we would not have this system? And from the minister's perspective, its answer is clear that it's not the only reason why to use it, but it surely helps for negotiating bigger budget for the sector. But I think the question really isn't important. And I think given if you compare Finland even to other European countries, we are like living in a really extreme world. Only the Denmark has something similar what we have when we look at the intensity of the performance-based funding. And we are weird also among our EU counterparts. And that requires really a justification from my perspective as well, that why we are doing so. And now the ministry's idea is that, okay, the model is stable, universities produce what they should produce, what they would produce anyway, and we just measure it and allocate the funding based on that. But that's in a way a lazy argumentation, because you could easily say that if this is the case, why don't you just give the money and don't measure it? If they are anyway doing what they were supposed to do. So there's a clear incentivization going on. And this is one of the things, and if there's certain individuals in the ministry who have been very strong and there for a long time, and they have an idea what's the good model for Finnish system. And partly this is related to that, because there have been also attempts to revise the model to be less performance oriented and let's say more stable in the sense that the money allocated based on other things than performance would matter more. But so far that hasn't happened. But as I mentioned already, we have ongoing evaluation, which is ordered by the ministry, who is looking now the impacts of the performance-based funding. And it's, as far as I know, taken care of by foreign researchers. I don't know who it is, but it's domestic as far as I know. And it will be published next spring, and we will see what kind of outcomes we will have from that.
Yeah,
because it's been required by researchers, politicians, universities, and if we have the model, should we evaluate it? Because otherwise we're just believing what you are saying. A sign of mistrust in a way, yeah. Also to other.
Your reflections really helpful. I think it makes sense. I hope some innovative model could be created for the system which is based on high trust. Maybe there's more performance, higher performance if there's less monitoring, if people are just trust on each other.
Yeah.
Okay, I think this is an interesting topic we can continuously to discuss, but meanwhile we have 2 questions in the chat box.
Okay, let's see.
First, I think Alex, maybe you want to ask about yourself.
Okay.
Are you there, Alex?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hello.
Yeah, please, you can raise your question.
Okay, so you see,
Yes.
while I am listening to your presentation, I'm just curious about your position as a researcher. So what would you consider your position closer to? For example, as an agency within the structure or agency beyond the structure? So I think deeper understanding of how to utilize private, public, and common education resources in different higher education contexts, might it be possible to express the non-voluntaristic and non-deterministic theory of human behavior through an alternative ontology? So maybe it might be a difficult question.
That's really a deep philosophy of science related question. And well, to put it in a very simple word, I would say that there is a good point from the perspective of agency theory that you shouldn't expect always the best, and you shouldn't expect always the good things from the people. But on the other hand, I mean, if I need to select between 2 extreme sides, that people are self-serving, opportunistic wealth maximizers, compared that they are super altruistic and do nothing wrong. As an academic and private citizen, I would say I would go for the altruistic channel or tube or whatever it is. But as a government representative who is need to take care of the taxpayers' money, I'm not sure I could just say that this is the sector which should be more or less left out of everything and have no responsibility or accountability in terms of measurement. And I have a little bit mixed options and views on this. And I've usually used the metaphor that if you have a headache, you take 1 painkiller to get rid of the headache. But you don't take 10 painkillers to get rid of the same headache. And it's a little bit the same with the performance-based funding, that we need to take into account somehow the middle way here and try to keep it more as a bonus funds or smaller proportion, which doesn't harm or let's say direct too much the institutions from their what they do, but then again, it offers bonuses, a little bit extra for those who want to pursue specifically these outcomes. I don't know if I understood your question correctly, but this would be my thoughts, how I understood it.
Yes, thank you, Jussi.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jussi. So this is not easy. This is just quite a philosophical. We have
But it's a good,
question from
yeah, but it's important. I mean, if you look
Yeah.
at really the deep side, you need to go to human motivation and what
Yeah.
makes humans motivate to do things, and then you go to the ontology to how it's
Yeah.
measured and what's the reality and so on.
Yeah, this also comes to the theory. I like is the logic because individuals actually are somehow associated. One is associated with multiple logic. So sometimes we need to activate someone based on the social context and the needs, and sometimes we are struggling with different logics.
Yeah. Paul Young is asking here, supernatural actors, are you referred to multi-level governance? How multiple principles at the same level, Ministry of Education and Finance? This is, I mean, I always ask about, okay, what agency theory is actually able to look at and how that's done. And from my perspective, the principles are those who have goals and then give the task and then are responsible in a way to monitor that task happens. So the Ministry of Education and Culture is the principle of universities, but the finance is not exactly that, because the finance Ministry of Finance allocates the money from the state budget to the Ministry of Education and Culture, and then expects them to use the money efficiently. So there's a principal-agent relationship in a way between the ministries, but not in the case of that both ministries would be competing principles to universities, unless there's a direct transfer of money and then responsibilities from the Ministry of Finance to universities, which there does not exist because it's the Ministry of Education and Culture who is doing this. But multi-level governance in terms of supernatural agencies, yes. So those supernatural agencies which finance universities, and then you have national bodies in between. So yeah, that's multi-level governance perspective. And yes, I refer them competing principles in a way.
Oh. I guess my question is especially about the multiple principles at the national level, because refers also to Professor Cai's comments earlier about the cultural differences. Here in China, especially in recent years, a very large proportion of the research funding for the research-intensive universities coming from Ministry of Science.
Yes.
Because there's a trend of we call integration of education, higher education, and the science policies. So for instance, last year, Tsinghua University, our neighbor, actually getting like 1/3 more funding from the government than our universities. One of the main reasons because a lot of money coming from the science side. Yeah. So I think previously maybe, yeah, there's multiple ministries governing higher education institutions, but they don't interact directly with universities. But now we observe a different kind of situations, like all ministries have their own agenda and also have the funding attached to it.
That's dangerous. This happens quite a lot in Europe, but these are, and that's like a historical perspective which was supported by the socialist systems in these countries. So each of the ministries have their own specialized training programs in higher education institutions, and then you have like 5 ministries financing the universities based on their disciplinary background. They have different ideas. And that's like, from the coordination perspective, that's super challenging. I mean, and that's the reason why most of the European countries, especially in the West, have opted that you have only one ministry responsible for the major transfers of money to education institutions, or funding council, whatever it's called. And usually the education and science and culture, especially the education and science, they are backed in the same ministry precisely because of the reason that you don't want to put 2 different, like science is competing against the education, because this happens. in ministries, and that's quite natural. So I would say that, yeah, this is a good phenomenon, and especially that would make interesting for China, in China, to investigate it. What is the opportunism in the context of multiple principles, and how actually institutions can develop a model where they can justify their actions without being opportunistic to one principle when they try to follow the interest of the other.
Yeah, that's very interesting question. I think the time is up, but we still have one question. I think
Sure.
if you do not mind, so if you can, because the line has some problem with the audio, so if you can respond quickly to the
sure.
last question.
Yeah. As you said, in Higher Education Institute, output measurability is low, outcome uncertainty is high, task programmability is low, which imply that it's better to use behavior-oriented contract. But now some universities in China, it begins to use performance-based salary, publication funding, students' employment, which is outcome-based contract. That's true. How to explain it? Well, I would say the whole thing here is maybe not either or, but to what extent you can max and mix these two approaches without having too many problems and giving the minimum possibility of dysfunctional behavior. And I would say that certain amount of performance-based funding, when it comes to the salaries or when it comes to the higher education institution financing, might be a good stimulator if the output measurability is high in this respect, like the publications a valid measurement, and then the uncertainty is low, that the institutions can actually carry on that. But giving too high volume of money attached to these indicators make universities more prone to substitute more meaningful goals and then try to maximize the money, to receive the money based on these indicators. And for this perspective, I would say, without knowing any details, that if China has a combination or some regions have combination of performance-based funding and then other funding which is equal to this behavior-based contracts, they are very much lying in the rest within the rest of the world, because the model we use in here in Finland is one kind of extreme. I wouldn't recommend easily to anyone.
Thank you very much, Jussi, for the excellent lecture and the very insightful answers, reflections, and also thank you for those who raised the interesting questions and joining the discussion. Also, thank you for everybody today staying with us until now. So as you know, so this is a lecture series organized by both universities from Peking U and also Tampere University. I hope you can follow our news and join our upcoming events. So thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Professor Tsai. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.